Hello everybody. This video I'm going to read through Evelyn Underhill's book on mysticism. We did mysticism and magic, and I have the sunset today, look. And the ocean's that way. Alright, so I hope you're well. Let's begin. I'll see what this chapter's about. I forgot where we were. Evelyn Underhill was from early 1900s, and she was just a mystic herself. She meditated for over 30 years and was just really wise and good. And this is just a study so we can understand the nature of what mysticism is and what it isn't. Oh, I forgot I got my mic out. Shoot. I hope it switches to the mic. Okay. Here we go. I wanted to start because the sun's going to go down and then it's going to get dark. There we go. So we just started this chapter. You can totally start here. Don't worry about starting in the other parts, but there's a whole playlist, so you're welcome to go to the playlist. But always you can just start here, and she describes enough for you to be able to catch on. We're on the second part of the book. It just says chapter 1, introductory. It's the mystic way. That's the part we're on right now. All right. And she's going to talk about this. I always offer this if you want to take a screenshot of that, if you want to look at that. I mean, I think the sunset's pretty awesome to look at too, though. Okay. The doctrine of annihilation is as the end of the soul's ascent, whatever the truth may be, as to the Muslim attitude concerning it, is decisively rejected by all European mystics, though a belief in it is constantly imputed to them by their enemies. For their aim is not the suppression of life, but its intensification, a change in its form. This change, they say, in a paradox, which is generally misunderstood, consists in the perfecting of personality by the utter surrender of self. It is true that the more orientally minded amongst them, such as Dionysius the Areopagite, do use language of a negative kind, which seems almost to involve a belief in the annihilation rather than the transformation of the self in God. But this is because they are trying to describe a condition of supersensible vitality from the point of view of the normal consciousness, to which it can only seem a nothing, a dark, a self-loss. Now, if you read George MacDonald's unspoken sermons, he has one called The White Stone, and it's really, really good about this union with God. Talks about it's talking about the book of Revelation, how St. John, when he got the revelation, I was been on the island of Patmos before a number of times in that cave. When he was taken up into heaven and he saw that, he got the word that God will give each person a white stone, and on that white stone is your God name, your name that only you have with God. You share it with God. And so it's like an indication that even if you're absorbed in God in a way, which we can't understand fully, the things that we describe about heaven, that's why they had to have so many symbols. You keep your individual God name that God has given you. It's worth contemplating. I love it. Further, okay, back to the book. It will be found that this temperamental language is generally an attempt to describe the conditions of transitory perception, not those of permanent existence. The characteristics, that is to say, of the ecstatic trance, in which for a short time the whole self is lifted to a transcendent levels, and the absolute is apprehended by a total suspension of the surface consciousness. Hence, the divine dark, the nothing, is not a state of non-being to which the mystic aspires to attain. It is rather an approximate and imperfect name for his consciousness of that undifferentiated Godhead, the supernal light, whence he may, in his ecstasies, bring down fire from heaven to light the world. In the mystics of the West, the highest form of divine union impel the self to some sort of active rather than of passive life, and this is now recognized by the best authorities as the true distinction between Christian and non-Christian mysticism. The Christian mystics, says Delacroix, move from the infinite to the definite. They aspire to infinitize life and to define infinity. They go from the conscious to the subconscious and from the subconscious to the conscious. The obstacle in their path is not consciousness in general, but self-consciousness, the consciousness of the ego. I was watching a video tonight, and I don't usually watch this guy, but it came to me for a reason. And anyway, this guy was Wayne Dyer, but he said, I didn't know Carlos Castaneda was one of his favorite people that taught him, but anyway, he was talking about how ego, he learned ego is earth guide only. It's only telling you how to get by in this life, and it's always coming from lack and stuff like that. And so, some people say ego is edge God out. I watched another video this morning on, he was talking about egotism is just this tyrannical inner child that's just locked and stuck in wounds that you had from 3 to 9 or so, or before that. And so not to hate it, but to integrate it in. And so there's lots of different, but it's egotism is still, the church describes the world, the flesh, and the devil. Those are our 3 main temptations. And the ego can be part of your flesh, egotism, when you let its tyrannical old wounds direct your life. Anyway, I could go a long time about that because I'm a psychologist in my day job for the last 20 plus years. But I'll go back to this. So the obstacle in their path is not consciousness in general, but the self-consciousness, the consciousness of the ego. The ego is the limitation, that which opposes itself to the infinite. The states of consciousness free from self, lost in a vaster consciousness, may become modes of the infinite and states of the divine consciousness. So Starbuck says, right, quote, the individual learns to transfer himself from a center of self-activity into an organ of revelation, of universal being, and to live a life of affection for and oneness with the larger life outside. Every time I'm in a mess, when I'm praying, God's always telling me, bigger picture, Cheryl, bigger picture, look at the bigger picture. I'm in that, And I was watching a video on Marcus Aurelius today, and he was saying, I went through something really bad last night, so I was just crying. I don't know how much of the night, but anyway. So I watched a lot of videos just sitting there trying to make sense. But Marcus Aurelius says, choose to see the world from a cosmic viewpoint, from high up, like an eagle, I will mount you up on wings like eagles, is what's said in the Old Testament. For a reason, you will rise and not grow weary, because you're not caught up in all of the things of this world as if they're the only things. You get more temperance and balance. Hence, the ideal of the great contemplatives, the end of their long education is to become, quote, modes of the infinite. Filled with an abounding sense of the divine life, of ultimate and adorable reality, sustaining and urging them on, they wish to communicate the revelation, the more abundant life, which they have received. Not spiritual marriage, but divine fecundity is to be their final state. In a sense, St. Teresa, of St. Teresa of Avila. In the seventh habitation, Suso, because she talked about the interior castle, so she's talking about the seventh castle, the seventh as you go in and in and in from the outer courts. And Suso, when his great renunciation is made, have achieved the quest, yet there is nothing passive in the condition to which they have come. Not Galahad, but the Grail-bearer is now their type, and in their life, words or works, they are impelled to exhibit that, quote, hidden treasure which desires to be found. It's so peaceful right now. You may think, my daughter, says St. Teresa, that the soul in this state of union, of unions in brackets, should be so absorbed that she can occupy herself with nothing. You deceive yourselves. She turns with greater ease and ardor than before to all that which belongs to the service of God. And when these occupations leave her free again, she remains in the enjoyment of that companionship. So it's basically like always in that companionship. No temperament is less slothful than the mystical one. Less slothful, And the, quote, quiet to which the mystics must school themselves in the early stages of contemplation is often the hardest of their tasks. The abandonment of bodily and intellectual activity is only undertaken in order that they may, in the words of Plotinus, energize enthusiastically upon another plane. Work they must, but this work may take many forms which are sometimes so wholly spiritual that they are not perceptible to the practical minds. Much of the misunderstanding and consequent contempt of the contemplative life comes from the narrow and superficial definition of, quote, work, which is set up by a muscular and wage-earning community, right? I read last night, I was on this walk here. Hi. You're doing it. Oh, good. I'm just doing a video, but I'm going to get the sun as well. And so I was reading in St. John of the Cross. Oh, you can't see the ocean, I was seeing. He was saying, oh, that's so funny, because he was saying that, all right, I'll just let you watch the nature for a second. I'm trying to get oh, you were getting it. There's the ocean. In between there. I want to get in your view here. Okay, and so, I know, right? Last night was so beautiful. I had to just sit with it. There's a biker woman. She's awesome. So St. John of the Cross said, I was reading the book, The Living Flame of Love. It's free online. There's a book called Christian Catholic Ethereal Library, I think. Catholic Christian, I don't know, but it has all these amazing books. And I have a video called Voice Dream Reader, and I don't get paid by them. It's this app that I talk about because my uncle introduced me to it that reads PDFs for you in this great British voice. I got the voice of Brian. Anyway, so in St. John of the Cross, and in his book, The Ascent to Mount Carmel, I was listening to The Ascent as I was going up this hill, and then I was listening to The Living Flame of Love on the way back down. He talks about God in such a beautiful way. He says, like, that God starts a fire in you, and in this fire, it's like you're a log, and if the log, it's describing the union, but if the log catches all this deep fire, right, then it's like the log gets so burnt up that it starts emanating sparks of light out of itself. I don't want to interrupt her sunset, so we're going to go here for a second. Look at that. I always wish you guys could be here, but you are. I'm sharing it to the extent that I can share it. Just entering into this book helps us so much because we're practicing leaving the normal thought. Beautiful. Right? That's why last night I was just like, I gotta get back out there. Enjoy. Okay, so energize enthusiastically upon another plane. So they are doing work, but it's not, that's what I was going to say. Sorry, I was remembering. St. John of the Cross said that it's kind of like when you have this union with God where he burns your soul up into his, it's like one act out of that place was more effective than all of the good acts you could have done in your whole life. Something like that. Not that they're small. I was thinking of like, even if you gave a dime to someone that was starving and they could buy a piece of bread with it, it's like that act is not worth doing. It's worth doing. But you could be pious and do all of these religious acts your whole life. But he said, as you have this union with divine love, with God, the acts that come from that love, that more pure love or something, it's like they change the course of the world or something, you know? They're really beautiful. I hear a lot from this bishop, you know, ours can marry and stuff, they're not married. But he says that all God is doing is taking our desires and ordering them aright. They're just disordered desires. There's nothing wrong with having passion. Again, like we've talked about in other chapters of this. It's just God is ordering our desires. He's purifying our desires so that we're actually more our true self. We're more free and less enslaved because our desires are less than our soul. And we're not meant to be bound by those, right? All recordings of mysticism in the West, then, are also records of supreme human activity, not only of the, quote, wrestlers in the spirit, end quote, but also of great organizers such as St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross. Wow, I didn't know she was going to mention him, right? Of missionaries preaching life to the spiritually dead, such as St. Francis of Assisi, St. Ignatius of Loyola, Meister Eckhart, Suso, Tauler, Fox, of philanthropists such as St. Catherine of Genoa, poets and prophets such as Mathilde of Magdeburg, Jacopone de Todi, and Blake. I think Blake is who she quoted at the beginning. Let me see, because she just keeps saying Blake. I don't know if it's, I can't remember which Blake. Anyway. Finally, of some immensely virile souls whose participation in the absolute life, with capital A and L, have seemed to force on them a national destiny. Of this, St. Bernard, St. Catherine of Siena, and the Blessed Joan of Arc are the supreme examples. The soul enamored of my truth, you know, capital M and T, my truth. Look at that sunset. Oh, wow. Said God's voice to St. Catherine of Siena, my truth never ceases to serve the whole world in general. Utterly remade in the interest of reality, exhibiting that dual condition of fruition and activity which Roisy Broik described as the crowning stage of human evolution, the, quote, supreme summit of the inner life. All of these lived as it were, with both hands toward the finite and towards the infinite, towards God and man. If you think of this, when Christ is holding his fingers like this, or a priest does, this means divine, the human and the divine, both. And here's the Trinity. And so they do a blessing sort of like this or whatever, and it's just like we have all at once. You're both like Christ, human and divine, but he's theosifying us. So it's like God became man so that man could become God. And the Trinity is helping us on this path, And so you're holding both hands here towards the infinite and towards the finite, towards God and man. It is true that in nearly every case, such great actives have first left the world as a necessary condition of obtaining contact with the absolute life, which reinforced their own, for a mind distracted by the many cannot apprehend the one. This is why so much of this at the beginning is so lonely and you're isolated. God had to take you away from everything so that you could be not distracted and know the one, like she's talking about with a capital O. Hence, the solitude of the wilderness is an essential part of mystical education. But having obtained that contact and established themselves upon transcendent levels, being unified with their source, not merely in temporary ecstasies, but by an act of complete surrender, they were impelled to abandon their solitude and resumed in some way their contact. Were you guys going to sit here?
No.
Okay. I'm like, it just set. And resumed in some way their contact with the world in order to become the medium whereby the life flowed out to the other men. To go up alone into the mountain and come back as an ambassador to the world has ever been the method of humanity's best friends. Wow, that's just like what Moses did as a picture. And Jesus would go up to the mountain to pray. And in the fourth watch of the night, he was walking across the sea. It's Mark 6. You can read about it. Okay, so to go up alone into the mountain and come back as an ambassador to the world has ever been the method of humanity's best friends. This systole and diastole motion, I forgot, they used to talk about that in school, of retreat as the preliminary to a return remains the true ideal of Christian mysticism in its highest development. Those in whom it is not found, however, great in other respects they may be, must be considered as having stopped short of the final stage. They didn't go into this loneliness. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Like I said, I cried like half the night last night. Thus, St. Catherine of Siena spent 3 years in hermit-like seclusion in the little room which we still see in her house in the Via Benincasa. Entirely cut off from the ordinary life of her family, within her own house, says her legend, she found the desert and a solitude in the midst of people. There Catherine endured many mortifications, was visited by ecstasies and visions, passed in fact through the states of purgation and illumination, which existed in her case side by side. This life of solitude was brought to an abrupt end by the experience which is symbolized in the vision of the mystic marriage, and the voice which then said to her, "Now will I wed thy soul, which shall ever be conjoined and united to me." Catherine, who had during her long retreat enjoyed illumination to a high degree, now entered upon the unitive state, in which the whole of her public life was passed. Its effect was immediately noticeable. She abandoned her solitude, joined in the family life, went out into the city to serve the poor and sick, attracted and taught disciples, converted sinners, and began that career of varied and boundless activity, which has made her name one of the greatest in the history of the 14th century. Nor does this mean that she ceased to live the sort of life which is characteristic of mystical consciousness, to experience direct contact with the transcendental world, to gaze into, quote, the abyss of divine love. On the contrary, her astonishing practical genius for affairs, her immense power of ruling men, drew its strength from the long series of visions and ecstasies which accompanied and supported her labors in the world. She descended into the valley of lilies to make herself more fruitful. That's a quote. Says her legend. The conscious vehicle of some, quote, power not herself, she spoke and acted with an authority which might have seemed strange enough in an uneducated daughter of the people, were it not justified by the fact that all who came into contact with her submitted to its influence. Our business, then, is to trace from its beginning a gradual and complete change in the equilibrium of the self. It is a change whereby that self turns from the unreal world of sense, in which it is normally immersed, first to apprehend, then to unite itself with absolute reality. Finally, possessed by and wholly surrendered to this transcendent life, becomes a medium whereby the spiritual world is seen in a unique degree of operating directly in the world of sense. Seen in a unique degree operating directly in the world of sense. In other words, we are to see the human mind advance from the mere perception of phenomena through the intuition, with occasional contact of the absolute, under its aspect of divine transcendence, to the entire realization of and union with absolute life, under its aspect of divine eminence. The completed mystical life, then, is more than intuitional. It is theopathic. In the old Frank language of the mystics, it is the deified life. Pathos is suffering or something, but passion. Pathos. Theos is God. Anyway, I don't know what theopathic is. If you do know, write in the comments. And if you're here right now, please, I invite you to like this video so that other people know it's worth watching, it's worth entering in, because that's how this world works. And share it with other like-minded people, because the algorithms keep changing on YouTube, and so people aren't going to get this unless you share it with other people, as far as I know. I mean, it can always change and God can intervene, or I will learn something different about tagging or something, but I'd appreciate it if you do that. That's giving back to this endeavor. Chapter 2, The Awakening of the Self. All right, so, psychology. So she's going to talk about psychology. Here's this while it's still light. You can take a screenshot if you'd like of that. I'll read it. The awakening of transcendental consciousness. Psychology, it is a form of conversion, generally abrupt, sometimes gradual. George Fox, an ineffable revelation, a vision of the divine immanent in the world, general characteristics of mystic conversion, instances, St. Francis of Assisi, the typical mystic, St. Catherine of Genoa, Madame Guyon, her character, her early life and conversion, Ruhlmann, Merswin, Suso, ecstatic conversion, Pascal, Brother Lawrence, the perception of divine reality in nature, the, quote, transfigured world. Instances may take two forms, one expansive and transcendent, two personal and immanent. Their characteristics discussed and compared: personal love, the essential factor, the stimulus which sets the process of transcendence to work. First, in the sequence of the mystic states, we must consider that decisive event. The awakening of the transcendental consciousness. This awakening, from the psychological point of view, appears to be an intense form of the much discussed phenomena of conversion, quote, conversion. In particular, it is closely akin to those deep and permanent conversions of the adult type, which some religious psychologists call sanctification. That's probably what I am, religious psychologist. Anyway, religion just means relinking. We're meant to relink to our soul self and to God. It's not meant to, mean this thing where people have reduced something beautiful that Christ taught us into rules of men that forget the essence, Not that some of those rules are very important, but anyway. In particular, is closely akin to those deep and permanent conversions of the adult type, which some religious psychologists call, quote, sanctification. She's quoting a guy named Starbuck. It is a disturbance of the equilibrium of the self, which results in the shifting of the field of consciousness from lower to higher levels, with a consequent removal of the center of interest from the subject to an object. Now brought into view, the necessary beginning of any process of transcendence. I forgot Wayne Dyer was talking about the man who wrote Amazing Grace. His name just escapes me right now, but how he was on a slave trading ship and he had a moment of what they call satori, which is clear vision. God showed him clearly what he was doing was wrong and abominable, and that's when he wrote Amazing Grace, was lost and then was found. 'Twas grace that taught my soul to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. So you can have a moment of awakening that, you've been caught up in this trance, in the hypnotism with the world, going after such stupidity, when there's something far higher than running after making riches on the backs of other people and justifying it however we do in our asleepness. It must not, however, be confused or identified with religious conversion as ordinarily understood, the sudden and emotional acceptance of theological beliefs which the self had previously either rejected or treated as conventions dwelling upon the margin of consciousness and having no meaning for her actual life. The mechanical process may be such the same, but the material involved, the results attained, belong to a higher order of reality. Conversion, says Starbuck, in words which are really far more descriptive of mystical awakening than of the revivalistic phenomena encouraged by the American Protestantism, quote, is primarily an unselfing. The first birth of the individual is into his own little world. He is controlled by the deep-seated instincts of self-preservation and self-enlargement, instincts which are doubtless a direct inheritance from his brute ancestry. The universe is organized around his own personality as a center. Conversion, then, is, quote, the larger world consciousness now pressing in on the individual consciousness. Often it breaks in suddenly and becomes a great new revelation. This is the first aspect of conversion. The person emerges from a smaller, limited world of existence into a larger world of being. His life becomes swallowed up in a larger whole. Like Marcus Aurelius was saying, to always look from the cosmic perspective. It's 33:30. Just look, which 33 reminds me of Matthew 6:33. That's it, right? Seek ye first. Jesus says in the verse before that, in verse 32, Matthew 6:32, he says, "Don't you know your Father knows all these things that you need of them?" But here's Matthew 6:33: "Seek first the kingdom of God, the ruling of this kingdom, the soul self, and Christ as king," or if you understand it that way, or this kingship instead of your egotism and personality, which isn't you. The kingship ruling. Seek first the kingdom of divine love, this greater cosmic kingdom, and his righteousness, his right wayness. The true right way is not the way of the egotism. The way of the egotism is fill up your belly, follow your appetites, step on people, always from lack, survival, take. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these other things will be added to you. They're so secondary, you just don't even care anymore. You had that union with God, It's like the union with the sun, that's just a metaphor, but it's like, anyway. his life becomes swallowed up in a larger whole. All conversion entails the abrupt or gradual emergence of intuitions from below the threshold, the consequent remaking of the field of consciousness, an alteration in the self's attitude to the world. I worked for 9 hours yesterday because I kept having timers. Well, one of the hours was walking, but for 8 hours, like pretty much straight. And one of the parts of the project I was working on, I looked up the definition for nous. The word metanoia is the word in Greek for repentance, but it's a metamorphosis of your nous. And your nous is not your mind, it's the capacity to understand things. And so it's exactly what she's describing. All conversion entails the abrupt or gradual emergence of intuitions from below the threshold, the consequent remaking of the field of consciousness. It's like your consciousness is being renewed, metamorphosized into something different. You must be born again, born of the flesh, born of the water of the body, of a woman, and then born in the baptismal waters, in this metanoia where you come to, your consciousness is shifted, a renewing of your mind. It's not just your mind. The nous, it says mind there in the translation, but it's N-O-U-S. Look up what that is. It's not mind. It's Dianoia was talking about, what was it saying? The faculty to come to an understanding. It's like all of that is mixed with something different, Just like your life would be completely different if you were acting from your soul, from this higher wisdom, versus your spoiled inner child that was neglected and wounded, and your egotism that keeps directing you by a pendulum of reactions and being too passive and letting people walk on you and then walking on them and being selfish and going back and forth in that pendulum. You're acting from your soul, the divine direction. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Thy will be done. You're knowing more and more internally, experientially, not just, oh, I know what it looks like to swim and I've read about it, I've seen videos about it. No, you're in the water doing it. So you understand more and more what it is to follow the will of God, to be in that, to be in love, divine love, agape, to operate from that place instead of reactiveness. Anyway, she says a remaking of the field of consciousness, an alteration in the self's attitude to the world. But in the mystic, this process is raised to the nth degree of intensity, for in him or her, it means the first emergence of that genius for the absolute, which is to constitute his distinctive character. An emergence enormous in its effect on every department of his life. Those to whom it happens often enough are already, quote, religious, sometimes deeply and earnestly so. Ruhlmann, Merswin, St. Catherine of Genoa, Madame Goyon, George Fox, all these had been bred up in piety and accepted in its entirety the Christian tradition. They were nonetheless conscious of an utter change in their world when this opening of the soul's eye took place. Sometimes the emergence of the mystical consciousness is gradual, unmarked by any definite crisis. The self slides gently, almost imperceptibly, from the old universe to the new. The records of mysticism, however, seem to suggest that this is exceptional, that travail is the normal accompaniment of birth. You don't just like, oh, here's my first child. Let me tell you, I watched all 3 of the Lord of the Rings in the hospital. I was in labor for like 27 hours. Anyway, I won't go into that, but it's usually travail is the normal accompaniment of this rebirth, like I was just talking about. I didn't know she was going to say that. And another type, of which George Fox is a typical example, there is no conversion in the ordinary sense, but a gradual and increasing lucidity, of which the beginning has hardly been noticed by the self, intermittently accompanies the pain, misery of mind, and inward struggles characteristic of the entrance upon the way of purgation. In St. John of the Cross, I think it was when I was listening to the living flame of divine love, think that's what it's called. He said, it's like, he was Catholic, so he believed in purgatory. It's like you are going through a sort of hell, a sort of purgation, a burning away of all of this stuff so that you don't have to go through it again, but you're facing it with, it's like walking through hell, it really is like that. Anyway, but God is doing it, so it's not the evil part like that. It's just the burning, painful part. Because we cling so much to these parts of ourselves that we thought we had to for survival, and they're not. They keep you back from God. One thing, I want to do a whole video of this, so I won't go into it, but I just have to say it, is I have this picture of a bird. I was drawing it one day because my friend was gone and I was sitting at her house and her kids' drawing stuff was out, so I just started drawing this bird. St. John of the Cross talks about if you've done all of this discipline, these spiritual disciplines, and let go of all these fetters, and God has helped you remove all of these ropes that were tied to you like you're a bird about to fly, and you're just thinking it's a little bird, and there's just this little string left. But you're so scared to go on that you don't use the force that God will give you to just let loose of that last string, so you never fly. Like she said, all these people who are really good but never went to the top of the mountain because it's a lie, I think, of the enemy. If you want to talk about the world of flesh and the devil, we wrestle not against flesh and bone, but powers and principalities and wicked places. Anyway, conversion and purification then go hand in hand, finally shading off into the serenity of the illuminated state. Fox's, quote, journal for the year 1647 contains a vivid account of these showings, our growing transcendental perceptions of a mind not yet at one with itself and struggling towards clearness of sight. Quote, though my exercises and troubles, he says, were very great, yet were they not so continual, but I had some intermissions, and was sometimes brought into such a heavenly joy that I thought I had been in Abraham's bosom. Thus in the deepest miseries, and in the greatest sorrows and temptations that many times beset me, the Lord in his mercy did keep me. I found that there were two thirsts in me, the one after the creatures to get help and strength there, and the other after the Lord, the Creator. Ellipsis again. It was so with me that there seemed to be two pleadings in me. Gosh, this is what I was experiencing yesterday. But ellipsis, if you looked at my journal, I didn't bring it with us, but I'm not going to show it. Anyway, one day when I had been walking solitarily abroad and was come home, I was wrapped up in the love of God, so that I could not but admire the greatness of his love. While I was in that condition, it was opened unto me by the eternal light and power, and I saw clearly therein. Ellipsis. But then did I see my troubles, trials, and temptations more clearly than ever I had done. You see, so it's painful because the more you touch that kiss of love, the more the light shines on all of this stuff that you're just like, oh gosh, I didn't see how much I was turned away before. It was coming to my mind the other night. It's kind of like if I had $100 in my bank account, $100, and it's like this thick of $1 bills, and like the amount of money God has would fill more than a football stadium. And it's like when I come to God and I'm like, oh, here, I kept thinking I was being so generous to keep spending that $100, and God gives us and it goes out from us. But it's like, or all the good works I did was just like that. It was like a dime again. It was just like 10 cents compared to the goodness of God and the love from which he loves us. Absolute infinite beingness, divine love. It just shines like everything good and everything wicked you did is just so magnified because you just don't want any of that. You don't want to hurt anybody. My brother wrote such an amazing thing about that. Epithumia, I remember. The something Numian lion. I have a whole page that I can see in my mind's eye, but I'll have to do a video on it sometime. if you look at mysticism, oh great, do you hear those howlings? I think it's Mysticism 21. I put a link to essence and personality. Some of that is in there. That is a pack of coyotes, if I ever heard one. Can you hear that? Ah, okay, trust and faith. We have 15 more minutes. Thus, in the deepest miseries, okay, so he thought he was in Abraham's bosom, right? But oh, then did I see my troubles, trials, and temptations more clearly than ever I had done. The great oscillations of the typical mystic between joy and pain are here replaced by a number of little ones. The, quote, two thirsts of the superficial and spiritual consciousness assert themselves by turns, you know. Each step towards the vision of the real, with a capital R, brings with it a reaction. The nascent, N-A-S-C-E-N-T, transcendental powers are easily fatigued, and the pendulum of the self. I drew a pendulum in my journal today, and this video I recommended on Twitter today was talking about wu-wei wisdom, and he was talking about the pendulum that we go between until we learn how to be here. It's so weird. I don't talk about pendulums much. I couldn't even remember how to spell it, but I drew it, 2 of them in my journal today. Anyway. Okay, so the great oscillation of the typical mystic between joy and pain are here replaced by a number of little ones. The two thirsts of the superficial and spiritual consciousness assert themselves by turns. Each step towards the vision of the real brings with it a reaction. The nascent transcendental powers are easily fatigued, and the pendulum, U-L-U-M, of self takes a shorter swing. Thank God. I was swept up to thee by thy beauty, and torn away from thee by my own weight, says St. Augustine, crystallizing the secret of this experience in an unforgettable phrase. Most often, however, if we may judge from those first-hand accounts which we possess, mystic conversion is a single and abrupt experience, sharply marked off from the long, dim struggles which precede and succeed it. Normally, it takes the form of a sudden and acute realization of a splendor and adorable reality in the world, or sometimes of its obverse, the divine sorrow at the heart of things. There's a song by a guy I guess that used to date Lauryn Hill, but it's like, divine sorrow, I thank you for the joy that followed. It's rough. It's a rough song. Anyway, I brought my flashlight. Divine sorrow at the heart of things never before perceived. Insofar as I am acquainted with the resources of language, there are no words in which this realization can be described. It is of so actual a nature that in comparison, the normal world of past perception seems but twilight at the best, just like right now. Consciousness has suddenly changed its rhythm, and a new aspect of the universe rushes in. The teasing mists are swept away, and reveal, if only for an instant, the sharp outline of the everlasting hills. He who knows this will know what I say, and will be convinced that the soul has then another life. That was the end of a long quote, I guess. In most cases, the onset of this new consciousness seems to the self so sudden, so clearly imposed from without, rather than developed from within, as to have a supernatural character. The typical case is, of course, that of St. Paul, the sudden light, the voice, the ecstasy, the complete alteration of life. We shall see, however, when we come to study the evidence of those mystics who have left a detailed record of their pre-converted state, that the apparently abrupt conversion is really, as a rule, the sequel and the result of a long period of restlessness, uncertainty, and mental stress. The deeper mind stirs uneasily in its prison, and its emergence is but the last of many efforts to escape. The temperament of the subject, his surroundings, the vague but persistent apprehensions of a supersensual reality which he could not find yet, could not forget. All these have prepared him for it. When, however, the subconscious intuitions, long ago quickened, are at last brought to birth, and the eyes are opened on new light, and it is significant that an actual sense of blinding radiance is a constant accompaniment of this state of consciousness. The storm and stress, the vague cravings and oscillations of past life are forgotten. In this abrupt recognition of reality, quote, all things are made new. From this point of life of the mystic begins. Conversion of this sort may be defined as a sudden, intense, and joyous perception of God immanent in the universe, of the divine beauty and unutterable splendor of that larger life in which the individual is immersed, and a new life to be lived by the self in correspondence with the now dominant fact of existence. Okay, so here, if I do this, look. The light goes in. It's like it blinds you, for a little bit. Like I was staring at the sun a little bit and I couldn't see the words on the piece of paper, and then it sort of goes inside of you and you just carry that, the light of God with you, in you, through you. The film of appearance is abruptly dissolved, immersed in new life to be lived. Okay, correspondence with this now dominant fact of existence. The film of appearance is abruptly dissolved, and the eternal fairy fields are disclosed, just like in George MacDonald's Phantastes and Lilith. You go into fairyland, I can't remember which one. For an instant, the neophyte sees nature with the eyes of God. In that glorious moment, all is beauty, and knowing this is love, and love is duty. But all of that is meant by such a statement as this only the mystics know, and even they seem unable to tell. I will here set down for comparison a few instances of such mystical conversions, quoting, where this is available, the actual description left by the subject of his own experience, or, in default of it, the earliest authentic account. Saint Seraphim of Sarov, I have a book of his that's really good about his conversion. I love that saint. He's in Russia. But anyway, in these cases, when grouped together, we shall see certain constant characteristics from which it may be possible to deduce the psychological law to which they owe their peculiar form. First, in point of time, the first, perhaps also in importance, amongst those which I've chosen is the case of St. Francis of Assisi, that great poet and contemplative, that impassioned lover of the absolute, whom the unfortunate enthusiasm of his agnostic admirers has presented to the modern world as a celestial patron of the socialist movement and the simple life. The fact that St. Francis wrote little and lived much, that his actions were of unequaled simplicity and directness, has blinded us to the fact that he is a typical mystic, the only one perhaps who forced the most trivial and sordid circumstances of sensual life to become perfect expressions of reality. Now the opening of St. Francis's eyes, which took place in A.D. 1206, when he was 24 years old. Oh, thank God for that. That's amazing. Had been preceded by a long, hard struggle between the life of the world and the persistent call of the Spirit. His mind, in modern language, had not unified itself. He was a high-spirited boy, full of vitality, a natural artist, with all its fastidiousness, which the artistic temperament involves. War and pleasure both attracted him, and upon them, says his legend, he miserably squandered and wasted his time. Nevertheless, he was vaguely dissatisfied. In the midst of festivities, he would have sudden fits of abstraction, abortive attempts of the growing transcendental consciousness, still imprisoned below the threshold, but aware of and in touch with the real, with a capital R, to force itself to the surface and seize the reins. Even in ignorance, says Thomas of Solano again, He was being led to perfect knowledge. Hold on, let me make sure I didn't skip a page. Yeah. He loved beauty, for he was by nature a poet and a musician, and he shrank instinctively from contact with ugliness and disease. But something which ran counter to this temperamental bias, and sometimes conquered it. He would then associate with beggars, tend the leprous, perform impulsive acts of charity and self-humiliation. This is so healing. I just want you to know, I was praying so earnestly last night in pain, and it's so weird because I just felt like, I finally have time because I finished my project last night to come back and read this. It's been a while. I've been wanting to do it. And this is exactly the best food for what my soul was going through last night, this pain. Anyway, thank you, St. Francis. I'm so glad. Just think, if he hadn't have chosen to live the holy life, we wouldn't be getting this right now. We wouldn't be getting this beautiful consolation. It was his choice, and it's our choices, each of our choices. It's little acts of holiness, of obedience, of surrender, of yielding to divine love. It's just like sitting to make on a Saturday night, a video for an hour for people. I'm not tooting my own horn here or anything. I'm just saying it's the little things that you do consistently that can change the world for real. When this divided state, described by the legend as, quote, the attempt to flee God's hand, end quote, had lasted for some years, it happened one day that he was walking in the country outside the gates of Assisi and passed the little church of St. Damiano, the which, I again quote from Thomas of Solano's Second Life, was almost ruinous and forsaken of all men. And being led by the Spirit, he went in to pray, and he fell down before the crucifix in devout supplication, and having been smitten by unwonted visitations, found himself another man than who he had gone in. I just pray this for everyone, You can pray as well. I have 2 sons myself, and so they're just people deep in my heart, that you just wish this for, and for your own self, for your own soul, to finally let go of all the stupid things that we hold on to. God be with each soul on this earth. Cause this to happen. In Jesus' name, amen. Here, then, is the first stage of conversion. The struggle between 2 discrepant ideals of life has attained its term. A sudden and apparently, quote, irrational impulse to some decisive act reaches the surface consciousness from the seething depths. The impulse is followed, and the swift emergence of the transcendental sense results. This unwanted visitation, didn't want it, affects an abrupt and involuntary alteration in the subject's consciousness, whereby he literally, quote, finds himself another man. He is as one who slept and now awakes. Just like I happened to watch that video, I didn't know the guy who wrote, Amazing Grace was on a slave trading ship and got that vision, that the crystallization of this new, at first fluid apprehension of reality in the form of vision and audition, auditory hearing, the pointing of the moral, the direct application of truth to the awakened self follows. Quote, and whilst he was thus moved straightway a thing unheard of for long ages. The painted image of Christ crucified spoke to him from out its pictured lips, and calling him by his name, Francis, it said, "Go, repair my house, the which, as thou seest, is falling into decay." And Francis trembled, being utterly amazed, and almost as it were carried away by these words. And he prepared to obey, for he was wholly set on the fulfilling of this commandment. But forasmuch as he felt that the change he had undergone was ineffable, it becomes us to be silent concerning it. Ellipsis. End quote. From this time he, quote, gave untiring toil to the repair of that church. For though the words which were said to him concerned to the divine church, which Christ bought with his own blood, he would not hasten to such heights, but little by little from things of the flesh would pass to those of the spirit. In a moment of time, Francis's whole universe had suffered complete rearrangement. There are no hesitations, no uncertainties. The change which he cannot describe, he knows to be central for life. Not for a moment does he think of disobeying the imperative voice which speaks to him from a higher plane of reality and demands the sacrifice of his career. All right, I wish you so much love. I'm honored that you shared this time with me. Please be respectful. Of the depths from which this comes. I wish you love.